welcome back to Bitwig. Today's modular concept is voice stacking. Now, last time we had another modular concept. We were talking about polyphony, the idea of how many notes can be triggered at a time and how the different modes work. That's a bit of a universal idea. Now, voice stacking is a bit more unique to Bitwig, at least in the way it's implemented, and it's the idea that we made our first choice. We made our polyphonic choice. In this case, something true mono. And it can be manipulated and pulled around a little bit. Now, voice stacking says, what if I had multiple copies of this voice? What if I loaded more of them? Now, of course, if you load a bunch of additional voices, that just means louder. So the trick, because of Bitwig's modulators, is to say, now how can the different voices diverge and bring life into different places and different areas? So yes, one choice is always polyphony and how many voices are available, but then on top of that, what if I could multiply those voices, or give them a life of their own, or give them, in this case, some skewed randomness so that they're all a little different? And along with Bitwig's modulator system, to say, yeah, it might be nice to have all 5 of them, in this case, drifting just a little bit and creating something interesting. So, that is today's concept, and if we want to talk about voice stacking, we have to start with an older idea called unison. Now, this is not unique to Bitwig. Unison is an idea that exists in many senses in many places, and the idea is that I have something working with one copy of an oscillator. I'm only listening to oscillator 1 in this case. What if that oscillator itself could be multiplied? If I had an easy way of saying, give me additional voices or copies out of that oscillator. So now I'm asking for 2 voices, and I can define the width of how far apart those voices are. 100 cents, a half step. That's probably not the best for rock and roll. But if I have a narrower range, say 9 cents here, and then I say, how many copies do I want? That detuning in that range gives us something else and something that we can play with immediately. That's the idea of unison, that a single module, in this case, the oscillator of the oscillator of polysynth, or in the case of Polymer or the grid, the wavetable, which has a bunch of unique unison modes that we won't dive into right now. That is a bit of a beast in and of itself. So that's the idea of unison. I have different oscillators. I might want them to drift further apart and create a thicker sound. Voice stacking takes this idea and says, well, what if it applied to entire instruments? What if we just duplicated notes wholesale and then we could create something else? So let's look at the fundamentals of voice stacking, how it works, a few ideas, and sure, a different direction to go with it as well. So I've got a Polymer sound here. I have a wavetable and a little LFO. Of course, I can move the index. The key of voice stacking is based in the modulator system because it's allowing us to make the different voices all behave a little bit differently. And I like these different areas with subtle changes. So part of the idea becomes, what if there was an easy way to have more voices and then kind of blur between those regions or those slightly different sounds, even get them all to occur at the same time? So wavetable is nice and visual. That's why we'd like to use it. I've already got voice stacking of 3 here. And we don't really notice it because it's just making everything a little louder right now. If I turn it back on, just a little louder. Now, it is a modulator and it is built into anything with polyphony. There is a direct access to voice stack spread, plus minus. Plus minus is important. What it's saying is, I have a very, in this case, particular target. And what I would like to do is go a little bit above that and a little bit below that. So now, if I assign this modulator, and I've got 3 voices, suddenly you can see those 3 reed heads on the wavetable. So plus minus, the amount of modulation I've set for voice 1 is a negative version of that, negative 100%. For voice 2, it's in the center, it's not going anywhere. And for voice 3, it's positive 100%. So it is a bipolar spread of however many voices are being engaged for voice stacking. One really common thing to target, maybe the easiest and probably the most useful for this video, so get out your headphones, is panning. Because once the voice stack gets assigned to panning, I'm going to go ahead and say 100%. Now what does that mean? It means, again, voice 1 is going to be negative 100%, hard left. Voice 2 is going to be 0, center. And voice 3 is going to be positive 100%, hard right. So now suddenly everything is a little bit isolated and a little bit audible. So this voice stack spread modulator could be applied anywhere. And it has a whole lot of synth purposes, like we saw in the artistic intro. So we could take the cutoff and spread that a little bit up and down. There's different choices where up and down is pretty good. Anything kind of bipolar. Even pitch could be interesting. Oh, very clustery. That's not always going to be so perfect. But it's not bad. But there are other ways to access these different voices and either assign them all together or individually. This, again, is all about Bitwig's modulator system. That is where the voice stacking gets its action and becomes interesting. So if I go to the bottom of the modulator list, voice stack is a modulator in and of itself. And it's defining a mode, which by default, again, negative 1 to 1. That's the negative 100% to 100, the bipolar. But there's also a unipolar option. So if I switch to the unipolar option, this could be useful where I don't want the knob to be a center position. Yes, I'm looking at attack time. Because if I'm modulating up and down, if this value becomes too small, then I'm kind of just laying a bunch of voices on top of each other. Modulating 0 and being at a low value, they're not very different. So maybe I just want to define a spread upward. So let's go ahead and stretch out attack time and maybe decay a little bit. And then we will be cascading each voice to be progressively longer. Maybe even release would be fun here too. Yeah, so the right side of the spectrum, those last voices are kind of drifting out a little bit later. Another place this could be useful is for settings that are at 0. And it really just depends how you want to configure the parameters. In this case, I've got phase modulation amount, how much to phase modulate the main oscillator with the sub as a modulator. Well, I'm set to 0, so just increasing here. Maybe I should turn the envelope on. Ooh, it's a little extreme. So again, those right side signals are a little bit stronger. This is an interesting option. Another spread option here is value, to say whatever range I define is actually just going to be, you're a little extreme, aren't you? Whatever range I define will be the first modulator. So now, voice 1 is at 0, voice 2 is at times 1, whatever I just said. So I said push this up 1. So voice 2 is going to be at the octave. Voice 3 will be the octave in the fifth, the next harmonic. So whether that's for setting mode values, just setting the modulation range is how much gets used for each interval. This is seen in a couple other places in Bitwig. But this could be handy, especially when you might increase the voice stack number later. And you want those additional values to be spaced out further. So that could be a useful way to deal with it. And one last and very important thing, even if you didn't want to use all these spreads to just easily set everything apart, there are also individual modulator sources, we can see them in the inspector here too, for the individual voices when they are being used. So I'm only set to 3 voices right now, so I have 3 sources that are directly available. So now what I could do is set one of the voices, let's just say voice 3, I want it to be up in a higher register in terms of what part of the wavetable is being accessed. Or maybe even voice 2, I just want to set to a different sub-oscillator just for that one voice. Once you have these individual voice assignments, pretty much anything is possible. And that's where everything gets interesting. So that's the functional part of how it works. And it's worth mentioning, if you're aware, in this post-VST world, we do have a plugin format called Clap now that is out in the world, and Bitwig supports it. One of the interesting things about Clap, and here we've got the Surge XT loaded, is that Clap can think polyphonically as well. So in the case of Bitwig, where, I'll just grab the pitch, we do have voice stacking. I could go ahead and set this to, again, voice stack 3. I do have the stack spread modulator. There's our quartal science sound. It's like I just accidentally discovered FM synthesis. So each note played is generating 3 notes, and each note can be set a little bit differently for something interesting. That's interesting when you're setting everything individually. It's interesting when you have some randomization within a patch, because then every voice will be occurring slightly differently. Now, like we talked about with polyphony, does this apply only to instruments? And the answer is no, not if you are in the grid. So here, I have a little FX grid and some audio running through it. Audio's coming in. State variable filter, 3 different modes. We're in bandpass right now. Tracking the level and using that to kind of pump the drive on a saturator a little bit. Cool. Are the different modes interesting? Sure, they could be, especially when you're changing the cutoff here. So this is true mono. Maybe what I want is 3 copies of this, 3 copies of the signal path. The whole system is essentially being duplicated 3 times, because then I could stack spread the mode of the SVF. And now voice 1 is in low pass, 2 in band pass, 3 in high pass. Again, let's go ahead and pan those out so you can hear them. And you can already see in the follower that now that it's in a polyphonic mode, each one of those individual signals is being assessed for how much strength is in the different signal bands. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to go ahead and spread the cutoff a little bit too. So yes, this could be something in the audio effect domain with effects grid. In Note Grid, it's the grid. What does polyphonic voice stacking mean here? Well, in this case, here's a preset called Tremolot from the library. What this one is doing, it's got voice stacking of the grid set to 2, which means for every note that is getting created, it's actually creating 2 copies. So I have 2 notes happening, and often they're overlapping. I'm just playing 1 note at a time, and I'm getting 2 out, because this one is kind of pushing how much to stay on channel 1, how much to send to channel 2, and then kind of trading between the 2 for 2 different sounds out of 1 instrument. But the idea is Note Grid, when in voice stacking, is just layering every note that gets created however many times. I'm holding 3 notes and I'm getting 6 out because voice stacking is set to 2. So if you're building a note effect, this is another place where it might be interesting or make things easy to program for certain cases. One other preset in the library, just to mention for a moment, is called Three Sisters. It's a sampler preset. And we're going to close out with a couple sampler examples here. So, voice stacking here on the sampler is set to 3. So when I play a single note, I've got 3 playheads. They're all kind of going at different rates. Everything seems very different for these 3 voices. And sure enough, if I were to right-click on the menu here, what I have is the second voice is being pushed up by 1 mode, and the third voice is being pushed up by 2 modes. What? It's a sampler preset using all 3 play modes of sampler. So if I were to just listen to voice 1, this is using the normal repitch mode of sampler. If I were to listen just to voice 2, this is using the cycles wavetable-ish mode of sampler for that second voice. And yes, there's a bunch of settings to define how that voice should be different. And if I were just to listen to voice 3, that is working in the textures, granular playback mode, with a bunch of grain size things defined and everything else to make each voice a little different. So if that's an example that interests you, again, Three Sisters, it's over in the library. Now, finally, let's load something and remix it a little bit. What is more traditional than a big, fat, grand piano sample? It looks like a bunch of samples. So let's change it. I've got some notes here. We could just let them play for a minute. So I have 2 ideas for how I want to change the factory grand piano and make it into something different. One, I kind of want to make it paddish. I want to make it something that can loop and not necessarily play from the beginning of each note, to kind of float around back and forth. And then number 2, using voice stacking, I think what I want to do is make it loop forwards and backwards so that each note is actually kind of like a 2-headed play machine that's just overlapping and going back and forth all the time. So, I have got my grand piano here. Let's go ahead and start. If I look, and it's just showing me the selected zone for whatever note is played, there's no looping set here. So I could click this button, but then I would only be setting it for 1 zone. We know where we're going. Let's do brute force. I'm going to select all zones, and 261 zones later, I would like to set them all to loop. And seeing the future, I'd like to make them maybe crossfade just a little bit so that I can have something paddy, continuous, a little bit smooth. Okay, so now when when I play any note. Yes, looks like looping is on for this zone because all 260 of them now have some looping. So if I want to make them loop and I want to control it, I'd like to give myself a couple knobs. And that means it's macro time because I'm going to assign these to a few different things. One to define the beginning, the loop start, and the other to define the length of. So I can kind of control and scrub around in the sound, make things louder, just go to super quiet, airy parts, what have you. So I've got the macro here. I want to go ahead, if this is, well, let's name them. If this is going to be start, and this is going to be length, then let's map start. It should completely, yes, control the loop start position, push it towards 100. But what it should also do is the playhead should come along for the ride. I don't want the playhead to just sit outside of the loop. I just want to move it so that I'm not always hearing from the very beginning of the sound. And I do like the quiet parts. So let's go ahead, before we continue, and add a little bit of compression. I'm going to do the normal thing on the top side of the ratio, and I'm going to do the abnormal thing on the bottom side where things get quieter. I want that part to get louder too, because I'd like to live in the air and the dust. That's not too bad. Okay, so we detoured into loudness land. We've set the start time. That works. Now the length control, we need to map that too. So I want it to go positive. Let's go ahead and bring the length down to 0 and say this knob will determine. There we go. So that's not too bad, and that's kind of working already. But looking ahead to that voice stacking part that I mentioned, where I kind of want this to loop in both directions all at the same time, I'm going to go ahead and cheat. I want to put the length and say, oh, this is how long the loop is? Well, how about half of that distance? I would like to move the playhead, because if the playhead starts in the middle, it's going to be a little bit easier to make something that goes forwards and backwards. Am I whispering because I'm playing such a quiet, breathy piano? Maybe I am. So... those articulations rolling in at different times. That's kind of fun. So, what is left? Yes, it's time for two voices. I want one to go forwards and one to go backwards. How do I achieve that with my sampler? Well, remember, the reason it's playing forwards is repitch, speed 100%. We are going forwards. What if speed was 0? And I'm going to take voice stack and say, let's modulate plus 100%. Because remember, voice stack means the lowest voice will be a negative version and the highest voice will be a positive version. Is voice stacking good for crazy synthy stuff? Yes. Will we see that again in the near future? Perhaps. But it works for anything. Just reworking our sampler, warping our instruments, and easily with one modulation here, achieving a new idea. So, thank you for joining us. We'll see you again soon.